So let me introduce my two friends here. I need to start with telling you the story. So Scott Gillum and I are on a thought leadership panel for Gartner. And we get to meet twice a year in Washington, D.C. And Gartner kind of asks us what we're seeing, and then they tell us what their research is going to be. And Scott's on the marketing side. I'm obviously on the sales side. And so at our meeting in August, Scott gets up on day 2, and he just stands up during a coffee break, and he just looks at all of us on the sales side, and he said, I'm telling you now, tomorrow, I'm going to call you all out and tell you that you're wasting money with SDRs, and you all are going to have to defend your position. And he sat down. So I'm going to put a social media post. I'm going to call you out by name. And he did. He put his post up, called us all out by name. Now, to his credit, I went right up to him and I said, are you willing to come to Dallas and debate this in public? And he said yes, and he's here. So Scott is with Carbon Design. Do I have that right? Okay. And it's a fascinating company. I'm not going to try to describe it because I know I will mess it up. But it's a digital ad agency, but almost a digital group of talent that you go to him and he helps you find the people who are really good at what they do. Because you can't get those people in one place, so you might as well have kind of like he's like an agent that goes finds you the amazing people in digital and B2B. And then so now if you don't know Chris Beall, Chris Beall is I want to call you like the doctor or the king of cold call, but that's probably not fair. So Chris has a little business called Connect and Sell, and they make about 100 million calls a year, something like that, 100 million calls a year. And so I went to Chris and I said, so I have this situation and I want you to debate a digital person who feels that we should maybe end this investment in SDRs because we're wasting money. And of course, Chris's whole business is based on you hiring people to call. So that's what we have here. So we have Scott Gillum taking the digital side, and we have Chris taking the traditional. By the way, I don't think Chris is traditional in any way, shape, or form. I think he's quite innovative in what he thinks we ought to be doing. So I'm going to introduce them, and we did create, this is a debate style, so they will get opening statements. They will actually we have questions that were predefined and negotiated between the teams. We do have 2 minutes and 1 minute, so I'll be keeping track. I'm going to come down there and moderate, and so I will welcome them both up the stage, Scott and Chris. So you're going to start by shaking hands, or all right?
A little hug.
All right, so I'm going to let. Let's let Scott go first, and then Chris as opening statements.
All right, thank you. Actually made it even worse. I wrote a post that said, do we really need outbound sales anymore? So I thought I was going to come down here, and you softened the blow, thank God, with what you just presented. I'm a sales. I grew up in sales. I have a startup. I'm still selling, so I come from a place of love. So what you're going to hear is coming from that place. I think, just as a show of hands, just to set some, give me some expectations on what we have in the room today. How many people, when an inbound call comes in, can see the browser history of that dialer or that caller? Okay. And when you make an outbound sales, how many people can see on an outbound call the browser or the online behavior of the people that you're contacting? Okay, so we've got some in the room. All right. This is what I think is the fundamental strategic issue facing organizations right now is we need inbound marketing and we need outbound sales. And the question is, where do we draw the line? And I'm going to argue that inbound marketing, arguing from the customer side, is you draw the line for inbound marketing as far as you possibly can go. And you let the customer or the buyer self-identify and say, I want to talk to someone. And the problem what we have right now is too much is getting inserted in front of that buyer and keeping them from their destination. And so what we know is that customers, buyers, prefer digital. 90% of all search for our buying process, 90% starts with search. And what they're looking for is speed. They want to find information as quickly as possible, right? So the key to conversion, this is not a volume challenge that we have. This is a conversion challenge. It's not a people problem. It is a listening problem, right? So the key to conversion is right message, right channel, right customer at the right time. And anything we do to keep from disrupting that path is slowing the process down, and it's adding cost to the cost of acquisition. How did I do on time?
Good.
Okay.
That's right on the dime.
All right.
All right, Chris, can you give us your opening statement?
I've never tried sitting down and talking before, so this is really fun.
You
Seats
can
are
walk.
cool, too. A little wiggle to them. So when I look at the world of selling, and I've been involved since I was a door-to-door salesman a long time ago. My first wife had a miscarriage, and when she was standing there in a pool of blood, I realized I needed to go and get a job within about, I don't know, maybe 12 hours. And I ended up knocking on doors in Phoenix, Arizona, and learning from scratch because they didn't know how to train me how to sell. I became the top fuller brush man in Arizona history in 2 weeks. And I did it by respecting who it was that opened that door and trying to do something useful for that person. And I think that allowed me to build trust. And in my view, this whole question of sales development, SDRs, selling in general comes down to trust. And the reason is simple. With all the changes that Dr. Dover talked about, which are huge, two things don't change with regard to B2B. One is the B2B buyer is scared, and they're scared because they're not risking their money. It doesn't matter how fangalized they get. It's not their money. It's their career. When you're risking your career, you're risking your future, you're risking your kid's college education, the affection of your dog, your husband, your wife, whatever it happens to be out there, you're going to be cautious. That buyer, that scared buyer, is never the specialist. The seller is always the specialist. That's why the seller is selling. If the buyer was a specialist, they just go ahead and buy based on their knowledge. They can never know enough to buy. They have to end up trusting somebody with a considered purchase. And I'm not talking about widgets and junk and whatever, but if I'm buying a real product that makes a difference for my business, I've got to have an expert help me out. And that means that my fear, my uncertainty, has to be augmented by trust. I've got to trust something. Am I going to trust a vendor's bot? I don't think so. Am I going to trust an ad? I don't think so. Am I going to trust a human being? Yeah, if they're really skilled and they do the right things. And so when you come right down to it, the role of the human being in the early part of the sales process is to produce trust, not information. Not to tell somebody what they ought to be doing, but to tell them who they could be working with as they go through the buying process. And therefore, that trust is best created earliest in the process, not latest, later. And it may be cheaper to get the trust later, but competitively, it's overwhelming to get the trust at the beginning. And therefore, I think sales development, whether done by sales development reps, of whom I agree there are 10 times too many, that's a problem we solve. But whether it's done by sales development reps or done by regular reps, it's going to start with a conversation, and the information is going to flow on top of that trust for the maximum effect.
Okay. Thank you for your opening statement. So the first question goes to Scott. Scott, you believe that digital marketing is more cost efficient than SDRs. Can you explain what you mean?
Yeah, I do, and I actually brought some numbers with me. So Chad Burmeister, who you know, he sent me out to, it's Scale X AI, and it's he has an organization that has AI-enabled BDRs. So I went to him for some information on the cost. So this is what it looks like now. You're looking at a fully loaded rep around $100,000 for an SDR or a BDR. It's $8 a dial, and for a connect, it is now 31 calls for a connect. That's their benchmark. If you're a new organization, you don't have a brand like a Microsoft, you're looking at close to 50 calls to a connect. So if you just do the math on the 31, it's $240 roughly for a contact. I went into our database, we're running search we're doing digital programs for about 10 clients, and that would include video, paid search, some digital banner. We are running an average of $160 per MQL conversion. So $240 for just a connection versus $160 for an actual MQL conversion. I think the other thing, the interesting thing that Chris just mentioned is trust. If you look at the data, what customers, buyers are saying is that they actually trust themselves getting the information more than they trust a vendor rep. In fact, they trust a vendor's website more than they actually trust the vendor's rep giving them the information. So I would agree, trust is the big issue. It's where they trust getting their information from. And they trust the fact that they can do it better themselves than they can by a vendor rep.
All right, Chris, 2 minutes.
Sure. So Chad Burmeister used to be my VP of sales. And yesterday he drove me to the airport in Fort Lauderdale. And we discussed this very matter. So here's what Chad actually does compared to what he says. So what Chad actually does is he uses Connect and Sell in order to talk to a lot of people, and that's how he's driven his business. Why does he do that? Because he knows that he's got to have conversations. The conversation's got to flow. The numbers that are given there are true numbers. Actually, they're not quite right. The conversation of the Connect conversion rate is actually about 22.4 to 1. My data is based on 50+ million dials, pretty accurate data. Big sample set, but it's still a big number. So if you have people manually dialing, sure, you're screwed. There's no way that that's going to work. I would actually not be in business if that were the case, but that's a different matter. Cost is one of the elements, and you do have to drive costs down. Competition is the bigger element. Having the cheapest team on the field and losing the championship is not a good strategy. And so if you just optimize for cost, you get what you get. And the fact of the matter is, and this is from a lot of data, Inside Sales published this a long time ago, InsideSales.com, whoever has the first conversation, live human conversation, wins about 72% of the deals in a competitive situation, and almost all situations are competitive. So when you come right down to it, what buyers say is one thing. How buyers act can be different. It's one thing to say, I don't want to talk to anybody. It's another thing to see what happens when they do.
Okay, 1 minute rebuttal.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, our success has to end with a rep. So no matter what I'm doing digitally, it's going to end with the conversion of a rep. And I think that the question is it a conversation that's spurred by something inbound, or is it an outbound conversation that's happening? I think if we look at the value provided through that journey and allowing customers, buyers, to go through that journey unaided or unobstructed and allow them to qualify themselves, by the time they put their hands up to have a conversation, they're better qualified and there's a higher conversion rate. So the question is, right now, are we asking customers what their preferred channel is? Are we asking them how they want to buy? Are we putting barriers in front of them that are not allowing them to get the destination where they want to go, which is collecting as much information as they can to make an informed decision? And if they feel like they need to have a conversation with a sales rep, we then allow that to happen. So it's where are we inserting them into the conversation?
All right, Chris, rebuttal, 1 minute.
Sure. So it is a big question of when, and it's a question of the cost of when. So if it's cheap enough to talk early, you win by talking early. By the time somebody raises their hand with you, they've raised their hand with every other person and every other company in your space. So you're in a dead-on competitive situation, competing on God knows what at that point, features, functions, price, whatever. You're better off competing on trust by having the first conversation than waiting until you're in a competitive situation where it's just down to who has the prettiest information.
Okay, so let's go to the second question. This one's for Chris. Is there value in considering the customer journey versus the sales process? If so, how should we approach our outbound efforts? 2 minutes.
Yeah, the customer journey is crucial, and the crucial part of the customer journey is the customer going from where they are right now psychologically to a state of trusting somebody, because you can't trust a company, but trusting a person sufficiently that over the period of time that they're going to consider buying something, whatever it is that you're selling, they will come back to you, to your person repeatedly in order to get more information and more comfort. So the average buyer's journey is about 3 years long. It takes about 3 years to replace a current solution, and everybody has a current solution no matter what you think. So that means 8.5% of your market is in market in the current quarter. So you have two choices. You can take that buyer's journey and say, I'm going to wait until 91.5% of it's over and see if I can make a diving catch. Or you can talk at the beginning and talk to them once a quarter and sweep up the entire market. So the buyer's journey is not so much a journey that starts when they recognize the problem. Everybody already recognized the problem. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't be able to sell to them. You don't get to go in and say, hey, you have a problem. They already know they have a problem. They already have a solution also. The question is, what are they going to do next? And if you're the one there to influence them, they're more likely to do it with you at about a 70% to 30% ratio.
Scott?
Well, I lean heavily on the buyer's journey. And I lean on that side of saying, look, do we really understand what buyers are trying to do? So are we allowing them to get to those destinations, as I mentioned before? The other thing that Dr. Dover and I heard in the room that day with Gartner is that if you look at the accumulated time a buyer spends talking to a sales rep, it is now down to 17%. So they're spending 83% of the time not talking to a salesperson, and they're doing something else, and that something else is online. So the question is, do we know what they're doing, and are we help facilitating that? So perhaps the role is changing of a SDR is instead of providing information in an outbound fashion that is very biased towards the organization and its products and services, maybe it's a facilitator of helping that particular buyer find the information that they're looking for, not only on the vendor site, but also maybe other sites as well, or providing additional information that helps them make an informed decision. So I think the question is, do we know enough about what our buyers are trying to do, and are we helping them get to that destination?
Chris, 1 minute, rebuttal.
Yeah, I have an example here of some buyers who are on a real journey. These are truckers. There's about 3.2 million of them out there. About 300,000 of them own their own trucks, independents. And a company called truckstop.com had to come up with a strategy for going and reaching out to that bunch of folks on their journey, and they're on a journey in a truck most of the time. And so they could have waited until those truckers said, hey, I really need help from something like truckstop.com that's going to be sort of a digital marketplace, going to hook me up with loads and all that kind of stuff. Or they could reach out to them while they were driving around on that buyer's journey. The effect of reaching out to them, I looked at their numbers from Friday. They had 757 conversations with a subset of those 300,000 truckers. By the way, that actually doesn't cause the rest of them to not answer the phone. It turns out that's not quite true. And what happens as a result? Well, these guys took a company from $200 million in enterprise value to $1 billion in enterprise value in 2 years with this approach. So if you take into account the buyer's journey and you say, I want to be there first with trust and talk to them over and over, you can win. I don't know what Truckstop's competition is doing, but I don't think they made $1 billion.
Scott?
We still use direct mail for some customers, right? But as you see millennials become a bigger part of the buyers, I don't think outbound tele and DM are going to work as effectively as allowing them to do as much as they want on their own in an inbound fashion. And actually, if we get to a place of understanding that customers are in charge, customers are driving the purchase process, and the better that we can help facilitate them to a destination, the better off we're going to be.
So I'm gonna go off script for a second.
Exciting.
Yes. So I've heard. I'm going to direct this at you, and then get his feedback. So Chris has put out a series called Market Dominance. So he's saying that you can control the conversations early. So in 2 minutes, can you help us understand what you mean by market dominance and why you think the phone is the way to establish that dominance?
Sure. So the idea of market dominance is, first of all, the purpose of it is revenue in a dominated market is worth 10 times as much the value of your company as revenue in a market you don't dominate. So it's worth dominating markets. You fail to dominate a market, you go out of business. We heard earlier, Microsoft won't talk about dominating markets, but actually has managed to do so, and it's quite admirable. It's what you're supposed to do in business. So the real question is, how are you going to dominate a market? Well, one thing is if you move first, like it's a game of chess, if you get 64 moves before the other player gets one, your chances of dominance go up. So now what's your move? The move you need to make to dominate a market is a move of building trust. You need to manufacture trust at pace and scale. If you're just relying on your features, your functions, your product, or whatever, it's very, very difficult to dominate markets. If you rely on human-to-human connections in order to create trust, and then use that trust to condition the market to have confirmation bias toward paying attention to your story, not to control, but to actually be trustworthy and therefore trusted, you can actually get the math to work. Can you do it with the telephone straight up? Probably not. Can you do it with conversations? Yeah, I can show you how to do that. It's not too hard. But you need to have discovery conversations with about 60% of your market over 3 years in order to dominate. You have to do it with skill. You can do the math from that. And for most markets of interest, it's quite doable by starting with conversations. The beauty of the conversation of the telephone-based route is it's very, very fast for the subset that answer the phone. And that subset is still quite large. You don't have to take the entire market at the beginning. You want to take the fast part, and the fast part are the ones who answer the phone. You curate that group, you talk to them over and over and over, and when they're ready to buy, they buy from you. I got an old guy who works for me. He sells to young people. He says, I just talk to everybody once a quarter. That's all I do. I'm just friendly, and I talk to them. When they're ready to buy, they buy from John Jackson. That's how you dominate markets.
Scott? Thoughts?
I think you dominate markets by listening to customers and buyers. Just to put it in perspective, whether it's 33 or whether it's 22, 15 years ago I did this research on how many calls it needed to make a connection to a buyer. I did it for IBM, and at that time it was 3 calls to a connection. It's at 22 or 31, and the 31 I actually saw in the system. I took a screenshot of it. It could be 49, I also saw that. So you all experience it. You're sitting in organizations that are making outbound calls. I think we're reaching a point of making buyers unreachable. You know, we saw the information that was just presented here. You dominate your markets by listening to customers and facilitating what their needs are and providing them good solutions. And it is definitely trust. But right now, what you're seeing in the research is that buyers trust themselves to get the information they're looking for more than they trust vendor reps to provide it for them.
Chris, do you have a rebuttal?
I agree. You got to listen to them. Listen to them with what actually was evolved to listen to customers. That's your ears connected to your brain, and your brain is an amazing thing. When you listen to somebody, you can listen passively, watch their behavior, observe them out on the internet or whatever. You can have a conversation. How much information do you get from an actual human conversation? About 20,000 bits a second. That's how much. So you talk to somebody for a minute, multiply 60 times 20,000. Anybody want to do that math? That's a lot of information. Most of that information comes in their voice. So until you actually are interacting, truly listening, it's funny that we use the word listening now to mean spying or observing or whatever. Listening is listening. And when we actually speak with somebody, listen with them, and have a conversation, magical things happen. We can learn what their needs really are, and we can enlighten them about stuff they didn't think about. It's not all about what they already know. It's about what they might learn from somebody who's gone through the effort of building a company around offering something new.
Scott, do you want to take a rebuttal?
Yeah, it is, and I think it is the conversation of what are you going to say. If you're in an opportunity that you actually have that conversation with a buyer, the question is, what value are you providing to them, right? How much homework have you done on their organization? How much do you know about them in that role? I saw some really great research a couple years ago from Forrester, and reps perform very, very well at understanding the industry, and they perform very, very well in understanding their products and services. Where they failed, and they fell down, was understanding that buyer's role inside of an organization. So the question is, how much training are we doing around that? So if we do have the opportunity to have that conversation, are our reps ready to have a conversation with a buyer who may be 20 years their senior and been in this industry a very long time and play a very important role in the buying group? So if the buying group is now, according to Gartner, 11 different individuals involved, do we understand what role that individual plays within that buying group?
Okay, so now I'm going to go back on script. Third question goes to Chris. CEB, now Gartner, has indicated that customers are 57% down the customer journey before they contact the firm. Further, Gartner research has indicated that digital marketing is involved in each stage of the customer journey. When should sales get involved in the funnel, early or late, and why?
Because the customers, on average, are so far down that journey before they get involved with the salesperson or contact the company, you have a competitive advantage if you go before them. Being late is very rarely a competitive advantage. And there's no sort of phrase out there that says, wow, I sure want to be late to the party. That would give me a real advantage. Right? So be early to the party. In fact, this particular stat indicates strongly that in a competitive world, and we do live in a competitive world, going with the herd is going to make you just one of the herd. Now you have to stand out from the herd. The easiest way to stand out from the herd is have the conversation first. So my recommendation is, as soon as you put somebody on a list, and a list is a market, people you really want to talk to, folks that if you were to sell to that person or that company, everyone else on that list gets a little bit easier, a little bit cheaper, a little bit lower risk. As soon as they're on the list, you want to talk to them, because talking to them conditions the entire journey.
So let me ask you a follow-up there. What happens if they're not willing to answer their phone?
Then they're the ones you didn't talk to.
Okay.
I mean, there's this conceit about this that I think is interesting. It is that Dust Bowl conceit. It's like, oh my God, it's horrible out there, right? Well, I have the convenience of having the facts. And the fact is two things. One is you can get a lot of conversations. I mean, we generated 2.67 million of them last year with senior people, with decision makers. So they're still out there. So saying they're not there and therefore I shouldn't use them, maybe someday they won't be there. But you know, it's kind of stabilized around this 22-to-1, 23-to-1 ratio. It's pretty tractable if you have the right technology. The ones that don't answer the phone, yeah, reach out to them all these other ways. These are not in conflict with each other. The question really is, do I speak early or late to the ones I can get conversations with? If I can get a conversation with somebody, I have a competitive advantage speaking early. That's all there is to it. So why not speak to the ones that will answer the phone? And it turns out almost everybody answers the phone. You know, when we reason from our own behavior about groups, we are out of our minds. The old, I never answer the phone, therefore nobody answers the phone. Little children do this, right? You can't see me, right? They close their eyes and say, you can't see me. When we reason from our own behavior and say everybody does it, I answered the phone the other day. I was getting on an airplane. Why? Oregon phone number. Oh, why would I do that? Board member in Oregon. So I answer the phone. Who was it? It was somebody from InsideSales.com using Connect and Sell in order to call me. Hoisted on my own petard. But you know what? How much did it cost me? A few seconds of talking to somebody. That's an all right thing to do. People answer the phone for a number of reasons. When we talk to them, if we are good, and by the way, the crappy SDR should go away, but if we're good, and if we can sell a meeting legitimately in 5 sentences or so, we should talk to folks who will answer the phone, and not the ones who don't.
So Scott, when should sales get involved in the funnel? Early or late, and why?
I think you all know my answer. By the way, I don't answer the phone. You're not late.
Me neither.
You're not late to the conversation. Digitally, I am picking up exactly what you're doing, where you're going, what you're looking at. I've seen it, and I'm passing that along to the rep. So we're not late to the conversation. In fact, I just aided the conversation to start at a different point. Instead of me doing a lot of probing questions up front and asking you basic information, I could provide information that says, I know what you've already read. I know that you've seen these things. You've downloaded these things off of our website. I know that you're already knowledgeable, and I can pick up on the conversation that's further down in the sales process. So allowing me to allow you to go and do the things that I'm tracking and I'm watching, and then provide that information to a salesperson, by the time that conversation is being had, it's actually further down in the process.
Chris, rebuttal?
Yeah, I guess maybe we think we know lots of things about people. Maybe we do. Last night I was sitting next to somebody in an airplane flying here. What did I know? He was in the water utility business. Should I have talked to this person? Probably not. I mean, I don't sell anything that water utility people like. It turns out, as I woke up at the end of the flight, he had taken our conversation, gone to his wife by text message, who's exactly my ideal customer that I never would have found by digital means. And we have a meeting set, and I think I'll manage to do a deal with her. So that reaching out to somebody inappropriately, too early or whatever, is going to make me probably about $250,000. That's a pretty good plane flight. I was proactive. I reached out. Something happened, right? Because I learned something in that conversation that I couldn't learn by observing this guy's wife's digital behavior, whatever that would have been. It turns out there's a huge amount we can learn in discovery. There's a huge amount we can learn if we get people into discovery. That's why it's called discovery. If we already knew everything about everybody that was worth knowing, why talk to them? But we don't.
Scott, rebuttal?
Yeah, I don't disagree. With conversations are great. My biggest client this year will be a result of an outbound call. But I had something to say to that person that I sparked her to actually want to have a conversation further. And the second thing was, she was already in a buying process. She was already in control. Timing, I just happened to hit her. So she was controlling the buying process. I happened to show up at the right time. It led to something else. I'm not disagreeing that the conversations in person are wrong at all. What I'm saying is that there's an opportunity for us to be less invasive and provide more value to the reps and make them actually more powerful when they do actually go outbound by allowing the customers or buyers to take a journey unheeded and allow them to provide us the information that helps us be smarter when we actually make that conversation with them.
Okay, so the next question goes to, let's see, Scott, you get this first. Is the age of the SDR over or at least overused?
Well, it's definitely overused. I think what's happening, and you guys all saw this information, is that we are throwing more people at a problem that is not a people problem. So as our yields go down, and as it requires more phone calls to actually make a connection, we're adding now machines into that equation, and we're adding more people, and that's not the problem. There aren't more buyers, right? There are more people in a decision-making team, or a decision-making organization for that purchase decision, but we aren't getting more buyers, right? So there are people out there who are seeing this linear effect that if I add another rep, and that productivity of the rep is $500,000, if I add another, it's gonna be $500,000, and it doesn't work that way, as you can see. The number of phone calls are going up, and the actual connections are going down. That's a trend that's going to continue. So they're still valuable, as I mentioned, for inbound sales or for inbound marketing. They're the conversion points. We still need to have a rep involved in converting. Right now, we just have too many.
Chris?
Sure. First of all, I agree completely. The count of SDRs out there is just insane. It's driven by venture capital. It's driven by not a great deal of creativity. I call it pseudo-specialization. The SDR is actually, the modern SDR is a generalist who does things like researches lists. That's called executing your company's strategic research, figuring out who the market is. We delegate that to SDRs. That's just wacko. But the SDR is a person who has a conversation with somebody. I have SDRs. I didn't believe in the things, but I've got them now. They're coaches right here. And they have, 25, 30, 40 conversations a day. They're very skilled at it, and they set appointments that are legitimate appointments. We do real discovery and real research before that discovery. It turns out that having 8 or 9 of those instead of having 200 of them is a reasonable thing. One of my customers' business plan called for 455 SDRs. Okay, that was wacko. But they get the job done with 52 and beat their number by 11%. That's not wacko. That's actually a pretty good idea because they got real specialization. One of the consequences of the difficulty of reaching people on the phone is that the job needs to be specialized. Phone navigation is not the same as selling. 95% of the time is spent navigating phone calls. Okay, let's specialize that away. That's a completely different issue from should we have a human being talking to somebody who might be a good person to talk to before our competitor talks to them.
You have any follow-up?
Yeah, half as many and twice as skilled. I'm all for that.
We like 10th as many and 5 times as skilled.
Yeah, yes.
So let's come around, and I think I'm going to throw this to Chris first because I know on our phone call we brought this up. So if we're not going to have as many SDRs, what's the entry-level position? Because right now that's the default entry-level position in sales is we put them in SDR and let them incubate for 6 months to 3 years before we allow them to do the real job of sales. So how are we going to do talent pipelining if we eliminate SDR roles?
I think the universities are going to fill in and provide us with fully qualified sellers. That's my view. I'm very optimistic. I've seen a program, it's in a really big state, I think it's called Texas, where they think big and they actually take action. I'm serious, actually. I think hiring somebody as an SDR to prep them to be an account executive is just truly insane. And it makes your SDR team non-functional because there's two missions now. One is to have a lot of people, the number of people it takes to output the number of sellers, and the other is to have an efficient organization that reaches out to the market and lets you have conversations to create trust and dominate. You have two missions that are disparate like that, you're just gonna fail. And it's easy to apprentice as a seller. There's sort of nothing to it. You take your experienced seller and you have them team sell with somebody who's relatively new, who's got the chops to be a seller, and that's great. Our SDRs in our company range in age from, I don't know, what is it, Eric, 35, 30 years old, thereabouts, up into their 70s. They're professional appointment setters who are fabulous. None of them are ever gonna become account executives. That's just because they're really, really good at selling meetings, and they might not be so good at selling things for money. There are different skill sets that are involved. So if you're gonna specialize, specialize, but don't, in my opinion, using your specialized force of top of funnel people as a training ground for other people just doesn't make sense. Go get real sellers, get them from Dr. Dover's program if you can. I hear it's like the NBA draft, a little hard to get them, and then put them in a selling role and let them learn. Pair them up with somebody.
Scott, what's your view here?
I agree. I think a lot of what people are using SDRs for right now can actually be automated. And I think you're going to find that more and more that's going to happen. It's not the right way. I actually totally agree that an account executive, a real true seller versus whatever the role might be for an SDR, go for the people that are actually going to sell and allow, again, it depends on what we're using SDRs for. If we're using them to set up demos, buyers can do that on their own. In fact, allow buyers to go have the demo online without actually putting a reg page in front of it. Let them do what they need to do, right? So how much of what SDRs are doing today could we move towards a buyer, let the buyers take care of on their own at a much lower cost, and allow them get to a point in the process where they actually want to have a conversation with the salesperson. So let's look at what they're doing and figure out how do we allow the customers to take it on themselves, let them do that work, and then allow them to have the conversation when they're ready with the person that actually knows what they're doing.
Okay, so we have time for one question from the audience. Oh, Bahadur, very quick. Sorry, Bahadur came up with the quick draw. So this is completely off script now.
Now it's really going to get fun.
All right, hope you guys are ready. Baha Caselli with AT&T IoT Group. Side note, I thought it was pretty ironic that Scott went up there with a pad and Chris went up there with his phone.
I totally noticed that as well. So.
I thought that was pretty ironic. So my question is, great content so far. My question is, how does the environment and the relationship change as the complexity of the solutions that you're selling increases?
It's a really good question, and that data point that came up earlier about CEB saying, buyers are 57% of the way through the buyer's journey before talking to a salesperson, that depends. Almost everything we're saying today, it depends. It depends on the buyer, it depends on the complexity of the transaction. Simple transactions that buyers have purchased in the past may never touch a rep. That may be totally automated, may go through and then we'll just do a reorder. Complex transactions, new buyers, they've never been experienced, and then this has actually got a big price tag on it. Right out of the gate, I may want to actually speak to an account executive to help me guide me through this process. In fact, some really interesting research a few years ago by CEB and Google that talked about the emotional buyers. What was most interesting is that B2B buyers are actually more emotionally connected to brands than consumers are. And the reason for that is the amount of risk involved in a purchase decision. So if you make a bad purchase decision at Target, are you gonna lose your job over that? No. So there is a lot of risk, and it's evolved from what Warren has said in the research that Neil Rackham did. What has evolved now is that B2B buyers make emotional purchases that they later then justify rationally. And it's because of the risk involved in making a purchase decision. So Depends on the size of the transaction, it depends on the familiarity of the buyer, depends on the situation that they're in inside their organization and how much risk is on them. But that, right out of the gate, depending on that risk equation, they may want to have a throat to choke right from the very beginning.
Chris?
Yeah, do they ever? I mean, you come right down to it, B2B buying is risky when it's new, when it's complex, when it's big. Those are the three things that make it risky. And you know, brand is nice and all, but from the seller's perspective, only one of the sellers can be the top brand. So when AT&T enters the IoT space in a big way, or entered it in a big way, you're new to it. You know, everybody was new to it. So being able to exploit your brand at that point is hard. You might be able to exploit it to get the conversation, you might not, but you got to be able to go out and be first if you want to establish yourself as the leader. So trust is the only antidote to fear. And the B2B buyer buying the complex, large, or considered purchase is afraid because they could lose their job, they could destroy their company. And that's not a good thing. And they're going to throw their trust to somebody, make it you.
We have room for one more question.
Keith Samuelson with Aero Electronics. After many years in technical sales, I see the benefits of both, but I think I'd be curious to know what your view is on the type of buyer that your process works with and the role of the buyer, especially in technical sales.
So I'm gonna go with Chris first.
Yeah, I've been told fairly consistently over the last 8.5 years that reaching out through the telephone doesn't work with two groups of buyers. One are engineers, software engineers, hardware engineers, doesn't work, they never answer the phone, they won't talk to anybody. And the other is security folks. And so our most successful companies are the ones who are reaching out with the phone to engineers and security folks. And the reason primarily is that everybody buys the conceit, nobody else does it, so you're alone. And when you're alone, you get to have those first conversations, and these people really do need to trust somebody. The fact that some of them might not have the personal inclination to reach out and have a conversation doesn't mean they're not human beings. They're still perfectly capable of having a conversation and trusting somebody. And so in a world of abundance, yeah, you know, one thing kind of prevails. In a world of scarcity, and it is a scarce thing to have conversations with those folks, you can dominate very quickly. There's a company called Varonis that was reaching out to folks like that. Little company coming from Israel into the US. They decided to go with an all-conversation approach. They were our customer at the time, they still are. They became a big public company very quickly. And the whole time they were being advised, hey, you're a little company from Israel, you're calling engineers, this is gonna fail. And the answer is, well, the other guys weren't doing it, so it worked.
Scott?
Spencer Wilson is in the back here, and Challenger's going to talk later. Mobilizers, and I'll allow Spencer to describe what mobilizers are very effective for us because they're actively seeking information. But I also tell you an example with a client, and it's SAP. There are a lot of activities that we're going to catch with digital that are what I would call false positives. They look like there is a buyer who's going down a buying process when they're actually not. They're just staying current, they're looking at trends, they're just, they may be a fan of your brand, so they're reading your information and they may show up as a false positive, right? So there's an outbound call. Here's where it works most effectively from a digital standpoint. When we learned this with SAP, what we found was if we found buyers who were collecting information to build business cases, they were the ones that we actually scored the highest because they actually had the highest conversion rate. So if they are hitting calculators, if they're downloading case studies, if you saw Gen Xers like case studies, right? Boomers like to see examples within industry. Things that are hitting around a business case. And what we found was true sales process starting or buying process starting in especially technology companies, it has to get past this hurdle of, is there an ROI? Is there a valid case to be made to change what we're doing today to something else? And when we start to see buyers hit information that is evolved around building a business case to make to an executive team, because that's what they're doing, they're collecting information to bring to the buying group to say there's a case to be made here. If you tag that and you score that the highest, that's the things that are most successful from a digital standpoint.
All right, we're at closing arguments or closing statements. So Chris, you're going to go first. We'll give you 2 minutes.
All right, first I want to thank everybody in this audience, especially those of you who reached out to me on LinkedIn and asked for a connection during this debate. That's why you keep your phone handy. Trust me, this isn't about human conversations versus technology. That's not what it's about. You can do that with a pad too, but it's a little harder. So I'm just saying, it's a sophisticated pad. It's not like a regular pad, so you can do that. Yeah, I mean, it's that old song, right? You must remember this, a kiss is still a kiss, right? Things don't change inside of human beings very fast. We're pretty old species. We got a lot of stuff in us that's really basic, and the most basic thing we have among humans is the ability to form trust relationships. And those trust relationships are essential to our lives. When we're putting our butt in the line, when we're buying on behalf of our company and it's not something we've bought before, and those are the only interesting sales, by the way. That's where the innovation economy lives. That's why SaaS and VC drove the craziness of this SDR thing, because they're forced to sell fast. But when we're buying something that we're unfamiliar with and we're putting our career on the line, we need to trust somebody. And to trust somebody, it's going to happen much more quickly and easily in a human conversation. Yeah, they're a little hard to get. You might end up paying me $5 for one, but a human conversation for $5, $10 ain't too bad. I agree. If they're like 600, that's crazy, but that's just, don't do that. So, you know, it's really simple to me. All of this stuff about what's going on with technology and all that's great. Human beings are still human beings. In order to make decisions, they make them emotionally. And in order to get over a hump, they got to trust somebody else. So while they say they trust themselves, their behavior says otherwise. When they're engaged with somebody that they do trust, and they trust them for reasons they might not fully understand, they modify their behavior and they justify the result.
Scott?
How many organizations in the audience have actually asked buyers how they want to make a purchase decision and what channels they want to use to make a decision in? How many organizations here have actually asked buyers how they want to buy? Go do that. We don't do it. It's the easiest thing. If you want to know what customers want or buyers want, ask them. By the way, no hands went up. We got to stop making assumptions. Right? We got to stop. We can get caught in our world, especially now that we have this huge technology stack that will provide all this information for us. It still isn't asking customers and buyers, what do they want? Again, the path to conversion is right customer, right time, right channel, right information. Just need to understand how that happens, and the best way to do it is ask your customers. All channels are good, but you got to figure out how you want to use them based on the audience set, based on the product or services that you're selling. You need to think strategically about how we do it. You don't take a hammer to everything. And that's what we're doing right now. We're taking a hammer to everything. Channels, buyers like to mix channels. They like to go in and out of channels. Digital happens at every stage of the buying point now. We used to think, oh, they'll start online and then they'll jump offline, we'll talk to a rep, and then they'll stay talking to the rep. Guess what? They hop back online again. And they'll continue to move online. Just think strategic and go ask buyers, ask your existing customers, how did they buy? How do they want to buy? And just cater to that. Your conversion rates will thank you.
So I want to thank Chris and Scott for both flying in. They're not from our town, but we'll adopt you both. And so once again, Scott is out of Washington, D.C., in digital ad agency. Very interesting things he's doing. He's got a long history and experience. And Chris, obviously, is with Connect and Sell and lives over on the West Coast. Well, not West Coast anymore. Actually, I don't know where you live anymore.
Port Townsend, it's as far northwest as
Yes,
you can
well,
get.
It's, Reno versus. So, by the way, we do want to let you know that this is the most significant event that Chris has done in his lifetime, because tomorrow you turn 60. Is that right?
This is my last professional act as a 64-year-old. This is very exciting.
64. Oh, it's okay. 64.
So tomorrow I turn 65.
So we were talking on that. Tomorrow begins apparently irrelevance, right? At 65 is what you were saying.
Yeah, I lapse into complete irrelevance. You will never hear from me again. I will never darken your door with a bunch of data.
So we're very grateful for Chris coming. He's going to be bugging out of here pretty quickly so that he can make it home to a birthday celebration. So thank you both. If we can give a hand to both of them.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Chris.
I brought a notepad, but I also brought a brand impression, so I'm not that dumb.
All right.